Alrighty, it is 11 and I would rather have too much time towards the end than too little, so I will go right ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, my name is Steven and I am here to talk about Terraform and CI/CD. I know this presentation and session had an incredibly inspirational title. That was because we were very new to the summit, and I think, to be honest, this presentation changed quite a bit in the last 48 hours. So I will get a pulse of the room later, but hopefully what we've put together today is meaningful and useful to all of you. So there's a few different things that we're going to talk about. First, of course, I have to talk about what CI/CD is and why you should do it in Terraform or why you should do it in general. Then I'll kind of walk us through a bit of a demo of what it looks like to stand up that pipeline for the first time, and then even what it would look like for your application team or someone outside to go and then make their first PR. And then I'll close with what time I have left on some tips as you sort of ramp up and keep learning. Before I keep going, how many of you use Terraform today? Okay, we have a good group of Terraform users. How many of you have CI/CD pipelines today? Okay, and how many of you have Terraform in your CI/CD pipelines? Okay, so that seems about right. I'm glad that's the case. So what I'm going to try to do is juggle this world of all of the different pieces to the puzzle, if you will. So showing off the power of Terraform, the multi-provider space, showing off how Terraform uniquely looks when you integrate it into your GitHub Actions in the case of today, but also the same for an ADO pipeline. And then also how those workflows will sort of look from both a maintainer and a application team perspective. So if you haven't met me yet, my name is Steven. I work on Azure Terraform. You've probably been to the 101 or the deep dive sessions. If you haven't, our team manages Azure deployments alongside the Bicep team, and we do a lot together to make sure that you all can succeed with infrastructure as code. And speaking of infrastructure as code, I think one of the things that I will sort of take a stance on early on is I'm going to talk to you a lot about what things should look like today, rather than explain how this thing was built today. So if things are a little hand-wavy at times, it's because I'm trying to get across the end desired goal, rather than digging into exactly how things were necessarily built for the purposes of the demos. So what is CI/CD? This is a very detailed response written by the wonderful Copilot. It just simply says that, in case you don't know, you want to essentially streamline and accelerate your development life cycles by automating integration, testing, and deployment of code changes. A quick sanity check for anyone who is not aware. In terms of why you would do CI/CD, there's a few different reasons. Number one, you want to ensure consistency, because one of the things that we all love is when things randomly happen out in the portal and then you suddenly are stuck with some changes that have occurred outside of your jurisdiction or your team's jurisdiction. You want to make sure that those changes that are coming in are well tested and documented and basically able to be referred to in the future. And then you also want to just make sure that all of that is done under your best practices. And the other question that you might have is, why use Terraform? And sorry, Jenkins, I cut your head off a bit. But the main reason why is because of the provider ecosystem. And I will show that off in a second here. But the fact that you're using Terraform doesn't mean that you're just using Azure. You can also use GitHub Actions. You can use Azure DevOps. You can also even provision your Azure AD stuff. And the other benefit of Terraform, of course, is the plan and apply information. You're going to be able to see what it's planning to do before you deploy, and you can always inspect that. And then, of course, you can also have state, and state will let you know if things have drifted while you were gone. If you come back to the repository a day later and you run those exact same pipelines and things are breaking, it is probably because something happened while you were away. So with all of that covered, I will try to walk us through what it looks like to be in practice here. I'm kind of using this image of firefighters because I think at times I may be making you all drink from the fire hose a bit. I apologize in advance, but what I will try to do with all of us today, and if you want to follow along, you can pull up this quick start article, is we're going to look at a quick start / Azure sample that walks through a fantastic, and I really do mean fantastic, CI/CD environment. I would say this is like a 300 level if you actually were to dig in there and understand everything. But we're going to keep it a little bit lighter by just talking about here's what it provisions, to what I alluded to earlier. We're going to focus on the what, not the how. And this was a quick start/sample written by the ALZ and AVM folks. If you've attended some of their sessions, they are the landing zone and verified modules team. They are really, really good at what they do. And in this case, our example will say that it's a GitHub Actions with OIDC. And you'll maybe wonder, well, how many of you know what OIDC is? So yes, OpenID connection, basically just think of it as a blessed way of securing your workflows in regards to authentication. You don't need to know more than that if you don't know anything about OIDC. I honestly didn't know anything that much about it before I stood this up, and for the purposes of this, you will be fine. So first thing we're going to do is we are crawling in the world of CI/CD, so how do we start standing up? Well, I will go right ahead and take us over to that article. So I'm going to wait for that to stop freaking out. Here is exactly what you will see. If you go ahead and click this little browse code link, it will take you to a GitHub repository. There is an equivalent example, and I forgot to say this earlier, for Azure DevOps. But the main things that we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to bootstrap a CI/CD pipeline with Terraform. So instead of using some other tooling, we're going to try to do everything in Terraform today from start to finish. So there's a few different pieces to this bootstrap. There is going to be the actual GitHub Actions runners. There's going to be the storage account for the actual, you know what? Let me make sure I actually open to this. So I'm not going to click into these because there's a lot going on in here, but there's a few things that are going on here. You're going to have your agents. You're going to have your GitHub Actions that are going to be your action runners. You're going to have a bunch of different things. The main thing that I want to say is if you go, for example, into the runner group file, you can see that this is being stood up through the GitHub provider in Terraform. And that is wonderful. And on the other hand, you can bootstrap your agents. And that is also using, in this case, an AVM module, but it's using the Terraform on Azure providers as well. So just to sort of show you what it looks like in practice, this bootstrap, when you run it, will provision all of your GitHub runners, or if you use ADO, your ADO runners, and it will also provision your Azure stuff, and it will even provision your storage account, which will store your state file. For those of you who aren't aware of what that does, I'll get to that in a second. We have a question here.
Can that also provision like the Azure integrated runners on GitHub?
I am honestly not a GitHub runner expert, but I think this quick start, I would dig into it myself. I would suggest you dig into it, but I think that anything that you can essentially do within this provider, so if you can do like an integrated runner, I don't know what it would look like in the documentation, but I would dig through that if there's a resource there.
I actually think it does. I think this actually spins up VMs in Azure and then sets up private links and all that kind of stuff, so it does it in a secure way.
Well, there's a newer feature where you can use the GitHub runners and then the private endpoint in Azure and connect them, and then it does stuff inside of the private.
Gotcha. Not aware of that, but
Yeah, that you would have to talk to that team or dig through the code yourself. It sounds like it's a newer feature, so depending on when the example was written / how up to date it is. Yep. Okay. Now I could bootstrap this live, but then the session would end. So what I did was I stood it up earlier, and we can go ahead and actually see what we spun up. So there's a few best practices that I want to call out here in terms of when you ran it. And of course, I'm hand waving that everything succeeded, but just trust me here. When we ran this, it produced these resource groups. And there's a few things that are here. Number one, you're going to have your dev environment, your test environment, and your production environment. That is great, and that is best practices, because you want to make sure that everything runs through their respective workflows, and you vet it all before it actually gets applied to production. We'll also see that that is utilized by our CI/CD pipeline in a second. The second thing is it actually has a designated resource group for identities. So if I go ahead and click in here, you can actually see a bunch of different managed identities, and these managed identities are actually separated out into dev and test and prod, as well as plan and apply, because you're going to have different permissions in terms of whether you're giving someone the permissions to look at the plan output versus whether or not you're going to actually give them the permissions to deploy into the production or various environments. Clicking right back here. One more thing that is being spun up here is my state file. In this case, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question, I did note that there's a private endpoint and a DNS zone and a NIC here. So there is some security also surrounding it. We're not going to dig into how that was set up, but just another call out. This storage account is how you want to store your state file, whether you're using an Azure storage account, you're using Terraform Enterprise or Terraform Cloud, or whatever other storage solutions you have. You want to store your state files in a secure location because they understand a lot about your environment, and that information getting out is not a great time. And I will actually go and kind of click into, for the sake of this, let's just pick the dev environment for today. And we actually had, in this case, they spun up a template, and this bootstrap actually gave like a basic virtual machine example. So we actually already deployed that before this session. But one thing that I will note is if you go into your access control and you look here, there is going to be let me see if I can. Okay, maybe not here. Well, there is a somewhere in here a managed identity, which you can actually see is tied to this. I'm going to cheat and look down here to see. This is all the stuff that you had to do to actually set it up. I will note you need a GitHub's organization and a personal access token if you're going to work with all of that. So, okay. Select role assignments. Okay, there we go, sorry. And you can see right here that we have the dev apply user assignment, managed identity assigned here, as well as the dev plan one assigned here to this resource group. And one is the contributor and one is the reader. This is all best practices. And again, I'm not going to dig into how that was spun up, but these are just things that I want to highlight in terms of what a good CI/CD pipeline will look like. Any questions about any of this before I actually start getting into GitHub? Okay, so now we're going to head over and I will show you the template that was actually created. So when we deployed our Bootstrap, it spun up this repository that has a template for essentially how your pipelines are going to look. And they have actions in here, such as the validate action, and then they also have templates written in YAML for CI and CD. So this is the continuous delivery one. It has a bunch of different actions that are happening in here, passing in a bunch of different variables, including your client, subscription, and tenant. When this was spun up, it actually stored some secrets as well for the repository, which is another good thing that I'm kind of hand-waving past for the time's sake. But when all of this is done staging, what it will look like is something like this repository. And this is just a representation of what we had earlier. You can see that when you click into this main.tf, we had the virtual network, the virtual machine. All of this was created. This looks very similar to what we just saw in the portal because it's exactly what was spun up in the portal. And when you go and look at the workflows here, they have a CI and a CD, and these are built, as you can see, off of the template. So the templates themselves can serve as something that the individual different repositories can triage off of, and you can sort of point to them. Once you bless those workflows, you just make the teams that are standing these various repositories up depend upon them, or rather you configure it so that they depend upon them. Now, I actually have no pull requests because I haven't done anything to this yet, but I did run an action when I started out And I just want to briefly show you what this looks like. This text, I'm sure, is very nice to read for you in the back, but I will just open this side and show you that there are a few different things that are happening. This is a good practice, right, in terms of CI/CD of you're starting out by planning with Terraform and then applying with Terraform in each respective environment. So there's a few things in here. Because this was the initial deployment, you can also see that it kind of gave a whole ton of info in terms of here's all this stuff that's going to happen. Not all these properties were even configured on our behalf, but they're just being exposed and stored within that state file, which that's a good reminder. I should say that this state file does reside inside the storage account, which I'm going to let that run for a bit because I think our internet is a little slow. Same thing with the apply workflow, and we have actually set this up, and I will show it off in a sec, where when you apply, it will actually require a manual validation to trigger the apply for production. So, all right, now we're going to go ahead and try to clone this. And yes, I'm going to use GitHub Desktop. I apologize to any of you who swear against GitHub Desktop. Oh, that's not great. I will just create a new repository, that's fine. All right. So we're in the repository. We can go ahead and open this in Visual Studio Code. And then now I'm just switching roles for a second. Pretend I'm no longer the guy who actually owns the CI/CD stuff. I'm actually the application guy or the guy who's trying to work with all of this. If I'm getting instructions from my wonderful infrastructure team or DevOps team, what they might say is, hey, go ahead and create a file in here called terraform.tf-vars. And while it's being created, the reason why I want you to create that file is because, not create a TF-vars. What I want you to do is make one simple change. I want you to go into tags, and I want you to set yourself as a owner. So the default equals owner equals Steven, and we'll just do that for the sake of today's example. And all that I need to do is this simple change. This isn't going to be a astronomical or catastrophic one. Adding Steven as owner, going to commit that. Oh, sorry, I need to create a new branch so I don't just push this. Publish this branch. Yes, testing and prod. All this CI/CD stuff I showed just to completely deploy it to prod and ruin everything. Exactly. It's fine. No one's ever had problems with that, right? So, okay, now it's saying I don't have changes. Must have been an issue with the code. I'm just gonna add this for the sake of making my GitHub do what I want it to. And then I'll push that to the initial branch. Preview the pull request, and I will create a pull request over here and add Steven as owner and his team. This is not at all what your pull request should look like, but for the sake of today, we are just going to do it like so. So the branch has not yet been deployed is what it's saying, but as soon as I create this PR, you can see my CI and CD is beginning to run, and it's actually going ahead and taking a look at everything. So the continuous integration is going to fail. The reason it fails is because when you look in here, it'll say that, oh, not that one. One of these tells me something. Well, this is actually something that is set up innately within how the I'll just cheat because I already ran this before. Basically what happened is in this main.tf, we have a linter set up, and I think the linter is upset at me for how I configured something. Or the demo gods are not with me today, which is also nothing new. Let's see. Great. This is fantastic. All right, I'm just gonna punt on that, unfortunately. The good thing is we have a PR that ran properly, so we can at least look at we have a run that ran properly for continuous integration previously. But anyways, if this all worked, the way that it would kind of flow is it would go through the development, production, and then test. Terraform validates on the plan, make sure all of it looks good. Then it would go ahead and do the continuous delivery afterwards. I am unable to find my bug in the moment, which is unfortunate because that means that we might have to have the demo stop around here. But any questions on any of this stuff in terms of getting started with Terraform / the power of Terraform with CI/CD? Okay. So a few more things that I want to cover. And we did get to this point where we were able to actually start walking in terms of the pipeline was stood up. Obviously, didn't manage to make it work. And that's okay. That's how life is. So a few other things that I want to talk about in terms of tips for your journey. So I have mentioned this before, but there is this phrase that I guess I've heard in terms of as you begin to run and, well, I guess in that previous image, fly, there is this phrase called a terralith. Anyone heard that before, terralith? It's a very simple way of understanding it, is you combine the words terraform and monolith. So when you slap them together, you get terralith. Now, terraliths are not great. They are functional for getting started, and oftentimes that is sort of what necessitates or leads to what a terralith ends up becoming. But they are really hard to maintain. When stuff breaks, it really becomes a nightmare. And if anyone has tried to work through or fix up a situation where they're in this terraliths, it's not great. And one of the best ways that we think we can set all of you up for success as you're developing is to use Azure Verified modules. And you might have heard this before from some of the other sessions, but make sure to check out the AVM modules. There is a pattern module for standing up the CI/CD runners for GitHub Actions as well as ADO. That's why that team was able to create that sample that stands things up. In terms of how all of this works, they even have this concept of the landing zone, which some of you who attended that session may be familiar with. But the bootstrap that essentially exists here is actually doing all of this that I just showed you. There's a few things that I'm just kind of hand waving over in terms of the private connections and all that. But you stand up the identities, you stand up the state, you have the state stored in the storage account, and then you have your agents and your runners that are doing all that goodness. In terms of the version control, you can see all those different service connections that are being run there. There's some ADO and GitHub support that is happening in terms of agent pool, runner group, all of that. Highly recommend that if you want to get started in terms of really deploying a really healthy CI/CD pipeline, this whole effort is a great place to start, as well as that quick start that I showed. Would recommend that you use that. So The other thing that I will say is ALZ and AVM are very prevalent on the Terraform and Azure community, so definitely make sure to check them out and see what they're up to. And they also have worked with us about different ideas. And I have some time since my demo failed live, but I will talk to you guys about another thing that has kind of been on my top of mind with the time I have left. So one of the things that happens a lot in module land is, okay, well, let me ask this question. How many of you have deployed a module? How many of you have needed to go back and change something in that module? How many of you would say that that is a relatively easy and painless experience? Those of you who kept your hands up, you are either geniuses or you are very lucky in terms of what you have to deal with. So most of the time when people are dealing with modules, there's this whole system, right? And I don't have slides for this, but I think this is something that's been on my mind and I want to kind of dive into. Oh, this is not even showing. Jeez. So when you're thinking about modules from there's a lot of perspectives. First of all, there's the CI/CD, Bootstrap, all of that we just covered. Then there's the actual module maintenance, updating that module, making sure it's up to date. And then you actually, once you spin up that module, need to get everyone to deploy it. And then after you spin it up, you deploy it in your applications or your first-party customers or your third-party customers' environments. Then they need to run successfully. They'll come scream at you if something breaks. It might have just been that they accidentally fat-fingered something, whatever it might be. But then there comes the inevitable day where migration needs to happen. Changes need to be made. Upgrades need to occur. Has anyone ever upgraded across major versions for the Azure RM provider? Can you keep your hands raised if that was a easy scenario or relatively straightforward? Okay, that's good. We had 50%. That's higher than I thought it would be. So upgrading and versioning has been something that we've heard a lot about. And there are a lot of different efforts that we've made over the past couple years in terms of reducing barriers, in terms of, here's my existing stuff. I want it to exist in these providers in new versions. Some of you might have seen, well, who is here for the TF 101 or the Terraform deep dive? The export tool, right? That takes the existing stuff in Azure portal and it will actually go ahead and deploy that, or sorry, not deploy it, show you what it looks like in HCL, and it will always point towards the newest major versions. So you might be in v2.86 for all I care. You can look at v4.5 of what your Azure resources are going to look like. Same thing occurs with AZ API. Regardless of what version you're on, you can, well, for one, you can control the resource versioning within the individual Terraform resources, but then you can also use things like that paste as AZ API functionality or the code samples to sort of reference and learn new things in AZ API. What am I trying to get at with all this? I promise I'm not just purely ad-libbing. The original session that I had was more so catered around this idea, I think, of what does it look like to live in a world where migration and upgrading and versioning is significantly less painful. And what does it look like for all of us to be able to live in that? We talked about the migration tool yesterday, the Azure Terraform Migrate tool. If you haven't played around with that, that essentially works both ways from AZ API to Azure RM and back. And that will also work in a way that can handle and digest what the latest versions are for those different things. And again, it does that in a way that handles state. And the main thing that I'm trying to get at here is all of you as pipeline maintainers are probably also going to have to deal with modules and maintaining those modules. And you're going to also have to deal with the fact that someday, somehow, that stuff needs to get shifted for whatever reason. Maybe it won't happen today. Maybe it won't happen tomorrow. Maybe it might not happen for the next 5 years for all I know. But when that happens, I think one of the benefits that Terraform has historically is the multi-cloud and the multi-provider ecosystem. But one of the things that we're trying to really make happen in the Azure world is making that transition from being a ClickOps user to a DevOps user way easier, as well as if you're a seasoned DevOps user, And eventually the day comes that you need to migrate or shift your modules that you can actually go ahead and do so. So that workflow, we're still thinking through it. We are happy to lean in with all of you to look at that together and figure out what that might look like. But I will see if... I think, unfortunately, that's pretty much everything I have today. The CI/CD pipeline did not cooperate with me. But one thing that I will say is, just for the sake of this, I'm going to rerun this just so you can take a look at what it would look like if it ran live. So it will spin up first the development plan, and then it will go into development apply, then test plan, test apply, and then production. And then at this point, we would need an approval process. So you can kind of track it if you click in here and see what it's doing. It installs the providers, works through all of that, does some planning for the apply. And in this case, right, we already made some changes to the repository, so it's not actually going to make any complaints to us. It does look like it actually made some changes. Let's take a look. So looks like this is going to get updated in place. What is being changed? Looks like the network security groups have changed. And then it will go here and it will run the continuous delivery for the apply. And we can also see that it's doing the same thing here in terms of updating things. Looks like we ran into an error. Not sure where that error came from. Alas, the demo gods are not my friends today. The one thing I do want to point out with how this is set up is when the plan is finished and it's ready to wait for an apply, it will stop at that step. That's how you should have your workflow set up. And then we would need a reviewer. In this case, I had Mark set up as my reviewer, but we're probably not going to run that since this isn't working. And if things aren't working in dev, you don't want to apply in prod. So any questions about any of this, CI/CD, Terraform, AVM, pipelines?
I guess I could definitely go and look at the code examples, maybe figure this out in more depth, but something that I often struggle with when bootstrapping an environment is just the order of operations of having, a storage account for my remote state. Mm-hmm. If you're unified using Terraform end-to-end for that bootstrap deployment, what's the approach for escrowing your state file in a storage account if it doesn't exist at the time it's being run?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you sort of do the state file escort when you're standing things up? Because if you stand up a storage account to store a state file in Terraform, that storage account will also have a state file. So this is a sort of famous chicken and the egg problem. There are solutions within Terraform Cloud and Terraform Enterprise to do that. And there is some open source solutions that I think people have devised. It is a relatively well understood one, but I think it's one that has kind of just, those are the blessed paths, it seems, nowadays. I don't know if, Mark, you have anything to add to that, but I think those are the solutions that I've seen most commonly. Yeah. And I will just note, I don't want to do that, that once this all runs, it will say prod apply waiting for review. I have obviously no permissions to do so. And then my wonderful module maintainer, Mark Gray, would show up here, see that development apply failed, and then say, hey, we can't deploy this. And I would be like, why not? And we would tussle with each other. So any other questions? All right, well, I appreciate everyone's time. Sorry that this didn't end up working out live, as many things don't. But we'll be here if you have any other questions, Terraform related. Mark and I will be hanging around, and then hope to have all of you join the Terraform community. because we really do value each and every one of you in terms of continuing to learn with the practitioners who are in this group. And then we are in hat survey / just tracking feedback times of year. So if you're a Terraform on Azure user, please go ahead and look at this and let us know what sort of things that you would need to give feedback on. And we do look through all those comments. We really do appreciate your feedback. So, all right. Thank you.